Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We get together several times a week to talk about all kinds of things. Today, Ann Lovejoy and Barbara Ochota are leading a discussion about the history of women at BISCC. There are centuries of experience of women here at Bainbridge, and they span beyond even the people we have in our room today, and we look forward to having a lively conversation. I want to start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the ancestral homelands of the Puget Sound Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water. We honor them and are learning from their stewardship of these lands and waters, and we are grateful for their help for us to be better stewards as well. Something to Talk About is sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which offers assisted and independent living and a vibrant memory care community up on Rolling Bay. If you'd like to learn more about Fieldstone, call 206-594-1010, email Ashley C. at fieldstonecommunities.com, or check out their website, fieldstonecommunities.com. And with that, I'll just ask if we can join this room that's meeting. If you'll just unmute yourself, you have.
Yeah, we've been happy to. Thank you, Reed. Barbara and I have been having many colorful conversations about the role of women in the changes we've seen in our own lifetime. And one of the things we thought would be interesting is to kind of develop a timeline and look at some of those changes nationally and internationally, and then relate them to our own lives. So Barbara, would you be willing to kind of give us a bit of an overview?
I would love to. So we're going to go way back to the Seneca Falls Convention in July 1848. And it was to discuss the rights of women. A convention discussed the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women. And so one of the things that they wrote as sort of a rallying cry was a reminder: women were not allowed to vote, had to submit to laws that they had no voice in their formation. Married women had no property rights. Husband had legal power over and responsibility for their wives to the extent that they could imprison or beat them with impunity. Divorce and child custody laws favored men, giving no rights to women. Women had to pay property taxes, although they had no representation in the levying of those property taxes. Women had no means to gain an education since no college or university would accept women students. So fast forward over much conflict, but in 1920, we got the right to vote. And, you know, that sounds like a long time ago, but I was thinking about it this morning, and I was born in 1950. So at that time, we'd only had the right to vote for 30 years. And that's short now that I have a longer sense of history in my life. And in 1920, the Women's Bureau of the Department of Labor was established to get information about women's situation at work. In 1923, 101 years ago, Alice Paul, who led the National Women's Party, drafted the Equal Rights Amendment.
Right.
And look where we're at 101 years later.
Wow.
Still not passed.
Still not passed.
Yeah. And then the Women's Bureau of the Department of Labor was created in 1961 to study, women's situation in the workplace. And a report published in 1963 showed discrimination against women in virtually every area of American life. And then Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, prohibiting employment discrimination on the basis of sex, as well as race, religion, and national origin. I'm reading something from National Women's History Alliance. They said the category sex was included as a last-ditch effort to kill the bill, but it passed anyway.
God forbid we should allow those girls to do anything, right?
Right. And then Title IX in the education codes was included in 1972. And I think of that as primarily equal access to women and for participating in sports, but it's all higher education and professional schools.
Oh my, not till
1972.
Yeah.
In 1972, 26% of men and women said they would not vote for a woman for president. In 1996, just 5% of women and 8% of men said they would not. The numbers look good, but it hasn't happened, we haven't gotten very close. Did you realize that just 25 years ago, married women were not issued credit cards in their own name?
How many years ago?
25, but I think this was
25.
written in 88, but so it's longer ago than that, but still. And then I remember help wanted ads in the newspapers used to be segregated for jobs for men and jobs for women. And the EEOC said that this was illegal in 1968, but they didn't have any enforcement power, so most newspapers just ignored it for years. And then finally, after lawsuits, you know, they started complying with the law. So
That's after women got to be lawyers.
that's after, and I think you're right about that. I think you're right about
Oh, and
that.
there's so many suits about, suing legal firms that women could be partners.
Mhm.
And those were coming up in the 70s and 80s, like definitely not just our lifetime, but within our working lifetime.
Well, I think some of the female Supreme Court justices had trouble getting jobs in law firms. They would be hired maybe as secretaries, but they weren't considered attorney material. So it's just ridiculous. Anyway, thinking about all those things, where should we start our own conversations? Anybody want to start?
Jerry.
Oh, Sheila, you're here?
One thing I was remembering is that when I had my first bank account, it turned out that my father had the right to take money out of it or to check on it. As he
It had to be a joint account.
his name was not on it.
That's
Oh,
interesting.
but, small local bank, right? But he said, oh, I just happened to notice that you didn't have a very high balance, because I was paying the mortgage at that time because I was working and things were kind of rough. And he was able to take money out of my account without, I didn't even think there was anything wrong with that. That's just how it was, right?
Yep. Mhm.
Right? And I remember my first credit card, trying to get a credit card at the Bon Marché, and I had to get it co-signed by my husband.
Husband.
Remember that?
I know you could get gas card. You could get a gas card, a credit card for gas. That was the first thing that you could get. And then once you had that, then you could move on to a department store or something like that. But you had to start with some credit card in the gas station.
I remember is it late 60s or early 70s, and I applied for a credit card at my bank. And I was working two jobs. So I had a regular full-time job as a teacher's aide, and then I had a part-time job waitressing. And they looked at my income and said, well, we can't count your second job. And so you don't make enough to qualify for a credit card. I just thought, okay.
Well, that's changed now, isn't it?
That has changed now. That has changed now. Oh, and one other thing, minimum wage was established. The first minimum wage was in 1938, set at 25 cents an hour. And then in 1950, it was 75 cents an hour.
Hey.
And then some stats about wage gap. So in 2022, women earned 83% of every dollar, 83 cents on every dollar earned by men.
Mhm.
Black women earned 70 cents of every dollar earned by white men. Hispanic women earned 65 cents of every dollar. And Asian women earned 93%, which is really surprising me. And there was no information about Native American women, which we know, are at the bottom in terms of earning and so many other things.
Well.
We know those things are still going on too. I was really fascinated to notice, like, as the minimum wage has come up, that people have been saying things to me like, I'm washing dishes and making $20 an hour. That used to be managerial salary, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, when I got to make $20 an hour, I thought, oh, I'm hot stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it was hot stuff, but still.
But I just think it's so interesting. Like, most of us have probably had the experience of, renting or buying a home or whatever it is, and feeling like we don't even think about, why would I need to get somebody to co-sign my loan? But in fact, for most of our lives, we would have to have that.
And I think that's still common in some inner city areas too, where you have to have co-signers for a woman, as a woman. Because you have a bigger family and you have less, your stability as far as taking care of your family or having a job and all that kind of stuff. So you always have to have co-signers.
Yeah, yeah. In 1974, I went to buy a Kirby vacuum. I mean, $300, right? The guy came and I said, okay, and he goes, no, your husband has to sign. I go, no, take your Kirby and go. And I don't know whatever he did. I ended up with a Kirby. So, but I was just shocked. I'm going, what do you mean? What do you mean?
My
Want to
mother
make sure
was,
he wants to vacuum with it.
Yeah.
my mother was widowed in 1961, and she was left with 7 children and a house. The mortgage had a death rider on it, so the mortgage was paid at that time, but she still had to come up with the taxes every year. But I never heard her have any issues because she never bought anything on credit. Nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
And she had nobody backing her up either. I mean, she kept her nose to the grindstone and paid everything as it was due and, you
Mhm.
know.
Well, I just found out that that is no longer a good way to go. When I just had to get this very expensive heat pump, I applied for a 24-month zero interest loan and was refused. And it was because they said, oh, you have no credit history. I've owned 5 houses, right? Or parts of 5 houses. I mean, bank owned some of it, right? But the point is, once you stop having debt on a regular basis like that, it erases your credit. And I have no credit history. How can that even be? So one of the things I think as women, especially, we should be thinking about, maybe it's wise to carry a little bit, right? And protect our credit, like get a gas card again, right? Or whatever. But thinking about how we have come so far in getting credit and like, how do we keep it active in our lives as we're aging? Because I thought it was a point of pride not to have any debt and to be, right? Yeah. I mean, most of us as single women, especially if you were a single mom, you tried your best to just pay everything off, right?
Yeah.
Is that true? Like if I have a credit card, but I pay it off every month?
Perfect.
So that seems to
You're-
work.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah. Have it and pay it off, and especially if you pay it off every month and they have a great history, but when you don't use it,
Right? You don't have a credit. Yeah.
Okay.
it can be trouble.
I was thinking about the right to work too, how my grandmother was a teacher for a long time, but when she got pregnant, they made her quit.
Mhm.
That you weren't allowed to have children and be a teacher. If they had a big deal about this fact that they let her keep working when she was married, but it was because it was a mining town in Montana and there was nobody else around. But having children, nope, that crossed the line. That made her unhireable as a teacher, right? I know.
Yeah.
That's great. I know, we used to have to work when I had my first one in 1968, after 6 months, man, I had to, not work. I could come back after 6 weeks, but they would not let us work after 6
The
months.
shame of being pregnant.
I know.
Yes.
And then 6.5 years later, when I had my younger daughter, I worked right up until the very end. So a lot had changed, but it was pretty interesting.
Oh.
How many women still put Mr. and Mrs. on your check?
Really?
Yeah, remember that my
remember
mom
that.
and dad, my mom and dad, anyway, they had Mr. and Mrs. Charlie Custer, the man, that's his name.
Oh, the
Yeah,
man's name,
right.
yeah.
That's his name.
Didn't even appear, huh?
Uh-huh.
You can go back to old obituaries too in the
Yeah.
newspaper and find out it was Mrs. Charles somebody. It wasn't, she lost her name.
Yeah.
She lost her identity.
Well, I didn't get married until I was 36. And so on the first anniversary, my mom sent me this cute card. She sent us a cute card, but it was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Howard Fite. And I called her and I said, that card is really cute, but I'm not Mrs. Howard Fite. I kept my own name. And she got really mad and she said, you have to, it's the law.
Uh-oh. I think a bunch of us are busted then, right?
Sheila's there. Oh, and Ann's there.
Okay.
Ann, did you want to say something?
I think Ann Olin has a comment.
Well, Joan's unmuted.
She's on mute.
I just wanted to say hello, and I'm
Hi.
agreeing with all these things. I do have one interesting thing. My mother, born in 1930, when she went to the university, she was only allowed to take home economics as a
Yeah.
major.
Oh, I remember.
I remember.
Yeah, yeah.
But was she able to go to graduate school if she wanted to?
Well, then she had like 5 children, so she was busy. And yeah, so I don't know the answer to that question. She didn't try to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I have no idea. And she was,
Yeah.
yeah.
Home economics.
Yeah, that
Learn
happened,
how to sew, learn how to cook.
Right?
yeah.
When I was in high school, it was home economics or shop, but girls were not allowed to take shop.
Right.
No.
that happened to me
As far as
too.
I knew, boys did not want to take home economics either. Now, if they'd called it domestic arts, we might have got a different story going, but yeah, and I remember my mother being ashamed of cooking and things like that. She thought she didn't want to be, she didn't want to do things that were considered woman tasks. She wanted to be a painter, an artist, and not an artiste, like, right?
Uh-huh. So in maybe 66 to 70, there was an organization at the school called Future Homemakers of America.
Yes.
Oh,
Right.
yes.
And
Yes.
yeah, we're all part of that, of course.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think,
It's mandatory. Oh, I'm in a club.
I think there were future farmers of America where I grew
Yeah.
up.
But you probably had to be a guy to be a future farmer.
Yeah, I have no idea. I didn't want to be in the future or anything.
I'd like us to talk a little bit about when you were young, what were your ideas of your career options and how has that changed for you over the years? Because I graduated from high school in 67 and it was like, well, teacher, maybe a nurse, a librarian. And that was kind of it. There was just so few careers that, were considered appropriate
Mhm. Or
And
you
that-
could get retail store.
or retail.
Yeah, retail.
That's true.
Work in a
Or
bakery.
waitressing. I certainly did
Waitressing,
waited
yeah.
my share of tables over the
Yeah,
years,
me
but
too.
yeah. And what was your family's expectation about college for you?
Oh,
Francis?
well, first of all, my career choice was to be a jockey. My dad was a jockey before I was born, and then it was a long story. He was in an accident. It was a crooked race was fixed, and the jockey behind him shocked his horse with an electric shocker. This was in the good old days
Gosh.
of the circuit. But I always wanted to be, I loved horses, still do, and always wanted to be a jockey. I ran away from home when I was 14, slept in a barn.
Wow.
Acres, and as a boy who was in my class family owned racehorses. So he met me and took me to the barn, lifted me over the fence and told me which barn was theirs. And Pilchuck Boy was the name of the horse. And he lied to me so I could stay in the barn. The horse liked me. And I don't know about the boy. And about dawn, the stable hand came and saw me and woke me up and said, "You can't stay here." And he said, "Your mama's gonna cry when she finds out you're gone." And he played on my heartstrings and I left. But I'm sorry, where we were going with this in terms.
Career, your ideas when you were young about what career path you
Well,
might
that
take.
stayed for a long time. And then I'm talking about college, that was it.
Mhm.
I was awarded a 4-year scholarship to Seattle University. And I was so proud. I came home and told my mother, Dad was still at work. And she said, "Well, what are you going to do with that?"
Oh,
What'd you do with
my.
that?
And that was, that was just sort of typical time. I was born in 1936 and she grew up on a farm. She was one of 10 girls. Her dad made the girls work like mules because he wanted boys and he had all these girls. And so that was all she knew was the boys had worth and girls had no worth. And education was not something in her picture. So so what did I do? I got married after 2 years of college and left school and, never went back.
But you developed quite a career.
Pardon?
You developed quite a career.
Right. Well, that was, I was always getting good grades in composition and writing. So I thought I would like to be a writer someday, but that was kind of way off in the Netherlands. You know, I just never really thought it would be a possibility. And I just happened, it's a long story. I just sort of created my own jobs. And I created my job at CLU. They hired me as a writer for the corporation, not as a newspaper reporter. And I saw that they weren't doing anything in terms of community relations or public relations, and started suggesting things they should do, like recycling newspapers, since they created all the newspapers.
Right.
And so that was the beginning. And one day they called me into the office and said, "We've created this new position, public relations manager, and you're it." That was
good.
the story. But, you know, it was, and I have to tell you, it wasn't just here in this country. About, I'm trying to think, this was 30 years ago. Good friend of mine and her husband moved to England. He was a sports coordinator. He created sports events and he traveled a lot. And I don't know how they ended up in London, but they did. And she was a designer, artist, graphic artist, a very good one. And so she applied for jobs and she got one at the one she really wanted at some institution in London, until they asked her if she had her husband's permission to work. And I was like, I thought it was just here, but it was in London too at the same time. And they were serious. And, you know, she said, so she just became a freelance artist. She just went out and started knocking on doors and showing her portfolio and got some freelance work. But I remember Seattle Times used to have a women's page.
Oh, a whole women's section, yeah.
They told us we couldn't wear pantsuits when I first went to work there. Then they changed that. And I was saying earlier that we had all kinds of adventures. Because of my position, the Seattle Rotary Club's program managers, they changed a lot, would call and ask me if one of the reporters could come speak to their meeting. No, they didn't have something for the program or whatever. I had to explain it to them. First of all, the reporters write, they don't speak. And it's true. I mean, very few of them could have done it. And then they also wanted some of our syndicated featured writers, you know, the reporters that were, you know, newspapers around the world. And I could occasionally arrange to get them and they would come because it'd be associated with our newspaper as well. And I remember trying to think of the authors, the columnist named Dave. It was Dave something or other, and he was a humorous columnist.
Oh, yeah.
In Florida.
Yes, he went to Florida.
Yes.
What was
And
Barry?
anyway, he
Barry?
was coming.
Dave
Barry.
Pardon?
Dave Barry.
Yes, thank you. I've been trying to think of it all day. And he was coming to Seattle there was a newspaper conference and he was going to be a speaker there. And of course, the Seattle Rotary heard about it and they called me, can we please have him come talk to us? And, you know, Seattle Rotary's got all the big check writers, you know, that's their big thing in terms of raising money as they write checks. That's not fair now. They're a lot different and they have women. So they're doing a lot more.
We were saying earlier, Rotary only started accepting women in 1980 something. And you were saying some people left because of.
Well, the Seattle
really?
International District Rotary was the first Rotary in the country to accept women. And when I say I belong to the Paulsville Rotary. And when that Rotary, I wasn't a member then, decided, they made an election among all the members and they elected to allow women. It's about time. I think we were 2 years late, but you know, at least they did it. Several members quit because we allowed women. Oh my goodness.
No girls allowed.
So, you know, I mean, it goes on. And I remember, you know, not being able to get a credit card. I remember I was divorced, a single mom with 3 little boys and trying to buy a house. And, you know, finally, I had to get my boss. He heard me talking on the phone one day and he called me into his office and he said, I'll underwrite the damn thing. He said, your credit, I said, I know you and I know your credit's good. And he said, I'll co-sign it with you. And bless his heart, he did until, I think it took 3 years, and then the banks loosened their restrictions. I was allowed to take it over myself. And
Wow.
but it just went on, and it's still going on, really. I mean, the paper just said about the wages.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And, I'll never forget, I was told, this is before I went to work at the Seattle Times. I was working at I don't know if I should name him. I'll name him, Wisefields. I was their copy chief, writing all their materials or catalogs and things. And I wasn't copy chief when I started. I was a copywriter. And after 3 months, my boss said, we're going to make you copy chief. This is great. Well, we had a copy chief. And I said, well, what about Jim? And he said, well, he's going to be a copywriter. And I said, is he happy with that? And Thad, my boss, said, yeah, he's happy with that. So I was, my first job was to hire another writer to replace me while I was copy chief. And this young woman was pretty smart. And she came up to me one day, or I was saying, here again, single mom. I was saying, oh, my dishwasher broke, my clothes washer broke, and I haven't got the money to buy another one. I'm looking at the ads to see. And she said, well, why don't you use your Wisefield card? Wisefield owned Value Mart stores at that time, which were like Kmart.
Yes, yes.
And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, well, Jim's got a Wisefield card, and he can get everything at cost, like at the warehouse. It's better than wholesale. And I said, what? And she said, yeah, he just bought a new dishwasher. And I said, Linda, you're kidding me. And she said, no. So I immediately went into my boss and said, I want a Wisefield card. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, you know what I'm talking about. If the managers get a Wisefield card and I can get a big discount, and I can buy my clothes washer, and everybody's happy. And he said, well, I can't do that because Jim's got one and I'm only allowed so many in the department. And I said, but wait a minute. I'm the copy chief manager. He answers to me. You don't have to take his away. Just give me one. And he said, well, I'm only allowed so many. And I said, I don't care how many you're allowed. I've got the job. I want the benefits. And he said, and then, the other thing Linda found out, this girl was something else, was how much he made. And he was making more than me.
Well, that's
And
no
he was-
surprise.
Yeah.
That's pretty common, right?
So that was my next weapon. I said, Thad, he's also making more than I am, and that's not fair. And he said, well, you haven't been here very long. I said, well, that speaks to my abilities. I had only been here 3 months and you made me copy chief over him. What does that say about my abilities? And I'm worth everything that he's making. And he said, well, I can't do that. I have to fire him because I've only got so much budget.
So,
And I said, he would have to take a big cut in the salary. Yeah, duh.
Too bad, so sad.
And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I want the Wisefield card and I want a salary for the copy chief, not for a copywriter. I'm now copy chief. I'm not a copywriter. I want the copy chief salary. And he said, well, I can't do that. And I said, Dad, I want it. And if I don't know where we go from here. And there was a department in government. Was it Eleanor Powell? No, that's not. Anyway, there was a little bit of, teeth in some of the rules, that about women at this time. So to make the long story short, he said, well, he said this to me in his office with the door open. Then he had his office and he had his boss's office, who was the vice president of marketing and advertising. And the dual secretary for both of them sat here. She heard everything. And he said, well, you're really a selfish little bitch, aren't you? Not kidding.
Did you find a new job soon
And I
after?
said, you can call me names or anything you want, but I'm gonna continue this fight. I want the salary and I want the card. I think I deserve it. I'm doing a job. You promoted me over him. There's just no argument. And I have to go to your boss, whose name happened to be Bud Schulberg, which I loved that name. And he said, well, let me see what I can do. Let me see what I can do. In the meantime, the secretary went into Bud's office and told him everything she'd heard. And so Bud called Thad, my boss, in and said, you must give Frances the card and you must give her the salary and you must deal with Jim. Either he stays at a lower salary or he quits, or, we let him go. It's his choice. He can stay on as a copywriter, but Frances gets the job, benefits and the salary. And I don't want to hear any more about anything like that ever again. So then Bud called me into his office and he said, I just want you to know that I will defend any situation like this, any woman or any minority. He said, as a Jew, and that's his word, not mine, as a Jew, I experienced so much discrimination, especially in the retail business.
Yeah.
And he said, I can identify with what you're feeling and good for you for fighting for it.
Yeah.
How unusual.
If it hadn't been for
Oh,
that
he was,
person who spoke up.
That's right. It takes, one person can either put the thumb on the scale that in a way that will help you or in a way that will continue to keep you down. I'm really hoping that the increased transparency about wages is going to really help, because I know I've always had trouble asking for more money. And also, if you don't know what other people are being paid, how do you negotiate that?
When I was one of the first, I guess I was the first woman horticulture editor for the Horticulture magazine, right? And was really thrilled about it, right? And got to go to, they had annual conferences and they went to really fancy places most of the time. But this time they just were in Boston, but they'd always had lunch at the Harvard Club, but they couldn't.
Because of
Because of me.
Women weren't
So we
allowed.
had to go somewhere else because women weren't allowed at the Harvard Club. And then I found out what other people were making, right? And said, similar to what you said, like, really, if you're going to do this, I understand the salary is X, not Y. Right? And to get the fisheye, like, how did you know that? It's like, well, does it matter how I knew? The point is, if we're, equal work. But I'm imagining that my experience was some years after yours, Frances.
Like sweat?
This was in the late 80s.
Even so? I mean,
Yeah. Well, and
because mine was like 70s.
right.
Think about how lower wages for most of us, I can only speak for myself, but over the course of our lifetime ends up with a much more modest retirement benefit.
Yes,
So
right.
we're still paying the cost
Yes,
of
exactly.
being female at this stage in our lives.
Mhm.
That pisses me off.
Yeah,
I have a couple of work stories that actually didn't turn out as well. They didn't happen to me, but I know I also worked in the publishing industry and I was a copy editor. And there were the editors, the contractual editors who, took people out to lunch and all that. They were all men, but there was one woman. And I thought, oh, well, that's really nice. They have a woman. But one day I walked out during lunchtime and she was operating the switchboard. And I said, why are you here? And she said, oh, during lunchtime, I operate the switchboard. And plus she was the editor for cookbooks. And, and she never did complain, but, but yeah, well, it takes, some people just aren't as forthright as you are and maybe don't. I think a lot of women do have an intrinsic sense that they don't really they're not worthy. I mean, it was probably good that your dad was a jockey, I mean, and then another instance, and I just couldn't believe it. I worked for another publishing company and there was one woman who was just excellent. I mean, she was a wonderful copy editor and she was smart and everything. And the head copy editor left. And I thought, well, she's probably going to get the job because she's really good. But she didn't get the job. And I thought, and I said to a friend who also worked there, I said, well, I don't understand why she didn't get the job because she's so good. And he said, well, I told Estelle that she wasn't interested in the job. So this man said, her coworker just said that she wasn't interested in the job and she wasn't even considered. So, and I just thought, how can that be, you know?
Just unfortunate.
Yeah, I think a lot of people relied on us being timid
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
and our
Oh,
emotional
exactly.
connection to
Yeah,
other
yeah.
people. You girl.
Yeah. You know, we really were. I mean, I remember one of my, I'll just say one more thing. My mother would have this little secret fund of money that, that she had, and she would add a little to it. And then she said, oh, I guess I have to ask Jimmy. That was my father. Oh, maybe I'll have to ask him for $10. I hope he'll give it to me. And I thought, why does she have to ask him for money? I mean, it just seems so wrong. I thought but anyway.
Yeah,
She
I think
did.
a lot of people had experiences like
Yeah.
that.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think as I listen to all of you, I have gone almost like this roller coaster life. I think of, because I grew up in a farming village and my dad and mother owned a general store. My dad went off to the Aleutians to work for the Corps of Engineers and my mom ran the store. And so everybody thought, and my grandparents were farmers. My grandfathers knew, I understood this as a little girl, that they really relied on my grandmothers. There was no way they could do these farms without, a partner like that. And that was the same with the general store. So, yeah, and my grandmother had gone to college, but she always actually, she became a teacher, but that was, considered quite, I guess, good, but anyway, it made me very naive. I got to college and women's lib was, people were marching and my friends thought I was terrible, that I wasn't so gung-ho. I like, what do you guys, why aren't you feeling as good as, all these men? And I couldn't really understand. But over the years, like, as you're reading everything, Barbara, and I have a daughter and a daughter-in-law, and I'm seeing, how they have to fight for everything and not getting the benefits that, men do. So, yeah, but I think, oh, was I so naive? And, and as you're mentioning some things too, I'm realizing, yeah, I just took some things for granted, it was like, oh yeah, this is the way it is. And I didn't question. And I look back and just some of the things that have come up in conversation, I think, oh yeah. Yeah.
What about, I bet you've got a few things to say.
Yes, I listen to everybody here. I was raised in a different country, different culture. All right. Since I was small, I raised my brother. I was 8 years old, right? So my goal, I wanted to be something, to do something for my country, for my little town. The first inkling I have for help was a nurse who lived 50 miles away. The doctor was 50, 100 miles away. So my goal was to be a nurse, to take care of the sick people in our town. So from the time I went to school, elementary, high school, I took, nursing subjects. And then we moved to Hawaii. And that's when everything changed. Because I was still, my goal was to be a nurse. So I volunteered at Tripler Army Hospital. Guess what? For 2 weeks, I volunteered. I saw blood coming from the soldiers' arms, and I said, oh no, that will never work. I cannot stand to see blood. So I said, I have to do something else with my life.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be a nurse. No way. So my goal then changed radically. I mean, so I became a bookkeeper. Because I said, I'm not going to see anybody sick with you know. And so I really was good in bookkeeping. I went to high school, night school, you know, and took about 3 years of bookkeeping. So I work as a bookkeeper through my life. But anyway, through that time, I started, my job is $1.50 an hour as a bookkeeper.
Wow.
But then when we moved to Alaska, my bookkeeping job really escalated because I was pretty timid. You know, I just did my job. And don't bother me. I have the door closed and I do my job, and my boss would give me more jobs, you know. So anyway, I just did my job and the money just came. I did not ask for money because of this extra job, because I wasn't opening my big mouth like I do now. The money just poured in through my job and through my reputation as a good bookkeeper. So that's where the money came in. And that's where I'm the happiest, is to just push a pencil and help people that doesn't
Know how to do that.
You still like to help people.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna be involved with seeing, you know, gory stuff. You know.
How lucky you learned that before you got through nursing school.
Yeah.
That was
Right. And
great.
and how lucky I was to see, you know, men, I mean men,
Mhm.
because women weren't, you know, they were not allowed in the military then. It was all,
right.
you know.
Right.
And I wasn't about to see men being exploited that way. And I said, no, no, not me. So anyway, that's where I'm at.
And good you have the
pushing pencil.
skills, because a lot of times women weren't even trained in math. You know, it's like math is
yeah.
not a girly skill,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, that's where I'm happiest, you know, because nobody bothers you. The books cannot bother you. So anyway, that's where I'm at today.
How about you, Rita?
Oh, I've had a kind of an interesting life. I'm the oldest of 8 children, and so that's why I'm pretty bossy and kind of have stuff organized. But I was going to go to college, and we were pretty poor, and so I applied for a government grant, and I didn't get it. And I thought, how could that possibly be? And I guess they thought we were so poor that, you know, that I wouldn't achieve anything. So I went to work for Sears, Roebuck and Company. And I filled orders down at First and Lander.
Oh, yeah.
And then was like 1965, and I think minimum wage was maybe $1.15. Well, they paid us like $1.75.
Wow.
We had medical and we had all kinds of benefits. I started working and then I was able to help my family, you know, and so I just kept on working. And I never did get back to college, but I thought that sometimes you find a course of work that really is good, that you can be really good at. And then I got into insurance, and that was something that just spoke to me. But I would just say to young women too, don't just not do something. And if an opportunity arises,
Go for it.
jump in there and do it, because, you know, pretty soon you're going to be 50 or 60 and you're going to go, I passed up all these things, whether it's a job, whether it's a vacation, whether it's exploring, whether it's some kind of a relationship that you think, oh no, I really can't do that. You can do that. And that's what I really want to encourage. My older daughter, 14 years ago, started a business here on Bainbridge, and was just this little thing, a woman-owned business, and it's kind of exploded. And she's doing stuff that she never thought that she would ever be able to do. And she's in a pretty high-powered, you know, business in climate and stuff and in energy. And it's just amazing to see what can be done. And like I said, she does have a couple of male employees now, but mostly when she first started, it was all women owned and all women driven. So there is nothing that we cannot do. And so I would say, don't hesitate, do it.
True.
Just do not hesitate and speak up for yourself. Have your facts there. And I told one boss, because I was so frustrated, I went to his office and I said, do not let these tears let you think. My tears are not because I'm emotional about this. I said, I am so frustrated. I said that's the only way that can come out. I said, so don't think that I am being weak here, because I am not. I'll show you I'm not. So anyway, that's just all that I would have to say.
I had a
Cheryl, you want to say?
Oh, sure. Well, I started out in high school being a bookkeeper.
Oh.
And found out that wasn't really what I wanted to do. So,
Not enough blood.
boring. So I really liked art and stuff like that. I really liked art. But I didn't go to school for I went to school for went to the Art Institute. And this was when I was in my 40s. And the Art Institute, it was really cool going there and going downtown, Seattle. I didn't finish my schooling. And I've had lots of jobs, waitressing, secretarial work. So I did a lot of jobs like that, but and house cleaning jobs. I really, I got paid very good for house cleaning. Like, oh boy, I can do this, and make some money and stuff. But it was really tiring work after a while.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about music and thinking about the men and how the men were in the music company. He's like the Beatles and everything like that. And there were no women rock stars, except for in the 80s, I think it was Joan Jett.
Joan Baez.
Joan Baez,
Joni Mitchell.
Yeah. Anyway, I kind of wanted to be a rock star. And I love music, so I like to be in the arts and to do with the arts. So, but so anyway, I was thinking about the jobs too that women did, and how many women have been abused in jobs.
Yeah. Used and abused.
Used and abused.
And frightened.
And that happened to me on a job. More than one, and I ended up very shy. And I'm not a shy person now, but I ended up very shy because of that. And so anyway, this is really a good group. I love this group. It's very nice. I love to talk in groups. So anyway, I really didn't end up with a high-powered job or anything like that, And I spent most of my life looking at men to take care of me. So I'm not doing that anymore. I've got my own place, my own money. I don't have to beg
Right.
for nothing. So Anyway, that's all.
Yes. Joan, did you have something to say?
Yes, I did. I mean, I do.
I know.
I want you to have more of these, Barbara, please.
Yes. Okay.
Because I have more to say and I have more comments too. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
I'm
you.
so glad you came, and we will schedule another one.
Yeah.
Okay, Sheila or Ann, do you have something you want to say? We've only got 5 minutes and I'm sorry.
Well, I will say a couple things. Learning, observing my mother as she was attempting to deal with her ambitions that she wasn't able to realize. And that she wasn't working, at least for the early part of her marriage. So she was really dependent on my father and financially, and they did make decisions together and so on. But she really showed me that she was dissatisfied with the situation of women. And they were both involved with the church very closely, and she would, bring up, using the wrong pronouns for God, and she was really working it. And so I learned from her that I did not want to be dependent on men. I expected that I would get married, have children, and that was what I expected. But I never wanted to be dependent. I learned that from her. And as a result, I was able to get a degree and get a good job and stay and, work my whole life. And it was very, very satisfying, fulfilling, and giving me a lot of personal esteem. Being the oldest child of 5 in my family, for some reason, and maybe it was the way my parents were too, for some reason, I didn't overly endorse the power of authority, men or women, or presidents or senators or anybody. I just would speak up in a lot of situations where it probably wasn't the usual thing. But I was naive. I didn't know any better. I didn't know to protect myself from some kind of backlash. And so even though I was a lot of times in jobs that were male dominated, like I worked for Bayer Pharmaceuticals in the United States, and it was mostly German men, German scientists, and American scientists. And for some reason, I would just speak right up, just showing my ignorance, both about either in the field or just in the culture. So I guess I benefited from watching my mother's real struggle and dissatisfaction, and it made me stick to my ability to have that independence and choice in my life. So that's all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I can say is that I was just the opposite of Anne as far as my mother goes. My grandmother was a single parent way back in the early 1900s. My mother was born in 1902. I was born in 1937. My mother was grandmother worked all of her life, and brilliant woman. My mother as well worked most of our lives when I was growing up, and she started the League of Women Voters in our little Republican conservative town of Short Hills, New Jersey, or Milburn, New Jersey. So I grew up with a mother who said to me, she didn't, by her working, you be what you want to be. And I went to school with the idea of being a marine biologist and then a veterinarian. Got married 2 years out of college, into college, or 3 years into college, but finished my degree. And I have moved from one job to another, of which have been wonderful jobs and interesting jobs, and they haven't all been the same. But I've never felt that I was underpaid or undervalued at all. And I am honestly blessed with what the opportunities that I've had. At least as we talk here, the only time I can remember a bad time was after I got divorced Now, a single parent, not being able to get a credit card. And I got one through Discover Card. They allowed us out. And I couldn't get insurance, couldn't get a health insurance, but I finally got some from this way out company. And those were the only two things that I really encountered as a woman. Interestingly enough, interesting.
Well, we're out of time just about. These were really interesting stories to hear. Thank you all for everything you had to say. And if you have topics that you'd like to come up in the future, talk to Ann or me when we're here, or Reed, and we'll make that happen. I have to say, we've had a lot of challenges over the many decades of our lives, but this is a wonderful time in life from my perspective. It just feels great to be this age and to not give a crap about so many things anymore.
Thank you so much, guys.
That's a great note to leave on.
Bye.